Happy Year of the Snake, everyone. If you didn't know, for the last 2 years, I've made a video for the Chinese New Year by doing some sort of themed list for whichever animal is featured for that year. In 2023, I simply talked about every rabbit Pokemon, and then in 2024, I made one where I talked about every dragon type by pointing out which ones are the weakest statistically. So for the Year of the Snake, I thought it would be fun to simply rank every snake Pokemon from my least favorite to favorite. But the thing is, some of them are absolutely based on snakes, but there are some questionable ones as well. I looked up a handful of online lists and compiled a list of 25 Pokemon that were either literally labeled as snakes in their in-game description, or described as snake or serpent-like on Bulbapedia. Really, the only ones I saw show up a couple times that I left off the list entirely are Centiskorch and Electric. To me, they are just based on a centipede and an eel, which may be snake adjacent, but no. So this is what I decided to do. I'm going to do 2 ranking lists, with the first part here being the ones that are a little more ambiguous. These are the serpents, but maybe not necessarily considered snakes, and I'll go through those pretty quick. They're like the honorable mentions. Then the actual list are the ones that are definitely labeled as snakes. The ones that have snake or some variation of it in their Pokedex description, with only 2 that I'm making the final call on. I'll explain as I go. If you agree or disagree that these should be considered snakes, then hey, build up a discussion in the comments. Even I'm not necessarily sold on some of these, but this is just for fun anyway. So hey, let's talk about some snakes. Something Indiana Jones clip about snakes here. First up, the serpents. Number 12, Gorobus. Gorobus is described as serpentine, but it's really more eel-like, so it made the questionable list for me. And right after I just said I'm not counting Electric. Look, I know, it's a gray area, but Gorobus is going all the way at the bottom because those evolutions of Clamperl are some of the most forgettable Pokemon. To me, it's just a whatever thing. Don't hate it, don't like it, don't ever think about it. I literally never noticed until right now that it has what looks like a shell bra, so that's weird. Number 11, Huntail. If Gorobus is really more eel-like, then Huntail is definitely more eel-like, and I really don't know if this should be counted if I left Electric off the list. But it is described as serpent-like, and its design origin is similar to a viper fish. Viper? I don't know. That's why it's on the questionable list. But just like with Gorobus, I don't really care about this thing, but it does look a little cooler and more intimidating, I guess. Number 10, Drampa. Drampa is also on the questionable list for being serpent-like, but it's really more like a Chinese dragon. But I don't know, I don't feel strongly about this thing either way. It's kind of funny to have an elderly-looking dragon called a Drampa, but this is also one that's just kind of there for me. Don't love it, don't hate it, it's fine. I do give it some props for having pink pupilless eyes, giving some Parasect vibes, so it goes above the last 2 for me. Number 9, Eternamax Eternatus. Oh yes, we're going from the Grandpa Dragon right to the 328-foot gigantic skeleton dragon thing with its weight unknown. But the Eternamax form of Eternatus is described as a hand crossed with a serpent, so here it is. I feel like regular Eternatus gets some hate from fans, but I don't know, I always kind of thought it was a pretty cool design. But the Eternamax form, I don't have much of an opinion of. I feel like you have to put some effort in just to see what you're even looking at here. Oh, and it has a base stat total of 1125, so this thing is no nonsense. I like the color scheme of it, but it's mostly a whatever design in the end. Number 8, Dratini. Dratini is probably the most snake-looking Pokemon on this questionables list, as its design is very much based on a sea serpent. I've always liked Dratini enough. I mean, it's a cute little light blue and white thing that has the honor of being the first dragon Pokemon, which I already talked more about for the Year of the Dragon video. I don't have much more to say about it. Dratini is just average for me. Number 7, Zygarde, the 50% form. Yet another dragon type, the 50% form of Zygarde does look pretty snake-like. Zygarde as a Pokemon has 3 very different looking forms, and I think it's a pretty cool idea. I think I like the 10% dog form the most though. This one could have probably easily been on the definite snakes list, but it is labeled as the order Pokemon, so I threw it on here. But yeah, it's not bad. I do really like the bold black and green color scheme on any of the Zygarde forms, so this one falls right in the middle for me. Number 6, Giratina, the origin form. Yet another dragon on this list, the origin form of Giratina is somewhat snake-like. I think it kinda has more of a centipede or scorpion vibe going for it, and even Bulbapedia says its design could be based on the Japanese yokai of Umukade, which is a giant centipede. But it is serpent shaped, and I do like this form more than the one on 6 legs. The origin form does have the honor of being on the cover for the Platinum version, so maybe that upped it a few spots for me. It's a busy design, but not bad. Number 5, Milotic. Like with Dratini, Milotic looks a lot like a sea serpent, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a snake. But it is a pretty sweet design. It's like the beautiful version of a Gyarados, as they are the two that evolve from the extremely weak fish. It's a good design with a nice color scheme, and yeah, I like Milotic. It's definitely a pain to get one in most games though. Number 4, Dragonair. Very similar thoughts on Dragonair that I have for Dratini, but I think Dragonair is just cooler looking. I've mentioned this a few times on this channel, but I am among the group that is not a fan of Dragonite, so Dragonair is where it's at for me. It's just a much longer, more majestic looking Dratini with a very similar shape as Milotic too. Number 3, Gyarados. See, to me, this one is pretty questionable, but the more I read about it, Gyarados kept being described as a sea serpent. I can really only see a Chinese dragon when I look at it, but yeah, it is very serpent shaped. I feel like back in the day, people loved Gyarados, and I never really put myself in that boat. But Gyarados is a pretty sweet design. It would be scary as heck encountering one of these in person. Also, I gotta give it some props for being the first rare Pokemon card I ever owned when I got the one that came in the Overgrowth deck. So I'd say I really like Gyarados, but I don't love it. Number 2, Hydreigon. This was kind of a last minute addition, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought Hydreigon should be included. It's very much based on the Hydra, and it's even in the name. The myth of the Hydra is, to simply put it, a serpent with many heads, so it should count on here on the serpent list. Because I certainly don't look at Hydreigon and think of a snake. But alas, this is the first one on the list that I would say that I love. Hydreigon is a top tier Gen 5 Pokemon for me. I love that the 2 heads on the side almost look like hand puppets too. Great stuff, but it's not my favorite of the serpents. Number 1, Rayquaza. Yeah, I've also stated this a few times before, but Rayquaza is my personal favorite legendary Pokemon, just barely above Articuno. It is the Emerald Sky Serpent that just had such a great design. I love the colors on it, how intimidating it looks, how it is the Pokemon that keeps Groudon and Kyogre in check, and that it always reminds me of Shenron from the Dragon Ball universe. Love it, great stuff, but is it a snake? You decide on that one. Which brings me now to the actual list of snakes. Again, these are specifically described in Pokedex entries as some sort of snake Pokemon, with only 2 exceptions that I made the final call on. I'm also going to go into a little more detail on these with my usual format, so consider this the actual list. These are my top 13 snake Pokemon. Number 13, Sandaconda. Coming in last for me is going to be Sandaconda, the pure ground-type sand snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 8. It is the evolved form of Silicobra at level 36. When it contracts its body, over 220 pounds of sand sprays from its nose. If it ever runs out of sand, it becomes disheartened. The name Sandaconda is a combination of sand and anaconda, the type of snake that it's based on. Along with it looking similar to an anaconda, it is also said that its design is similar to a sidewinder desert snake and a ball python. Its nose looks a bit like a double-barrel gun, which has to do with it shooting sand out of it. Statistically, it has excellent defense and attack and is pretty average with everything else. And as for me, it's just an overall design that I'm not really a fan of. Ground is one of my favorite types, but I don't know, this one doesn't do it for me. I don't love the shooting sand from its nose thing, and it just looks weird with its head buried in its coiled body. I don't hate it or anything, but meh, it's my least favorite of the snakes. Pretty D tier for me. Number 12, Seviper. In second to last, I put Seviper, the pure poison type fang snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 3. It does not evolve from or into anything else. Seviper's sword-like tail serves 2 purposes. It slashes foes and douses them with secreted poison. This Pokemon will not give up its long-running blood feud with Zangoose. The name Seviper is a combination of the words sever and viper. Its design is similar to a viper, of course, with its color pattern resembling an elegant pit viper. The rivalry it has with Zangoose is based on how people used to pit venomous snakes against mongooses for entertainment, which has since been mostly done away with, as it is considered to be inhumane. Statistically, it has good attack and special attack, average with everything else. And yeah, I personally think Seviper is just a pretty boring design. A black snake with some yellow, red, and purple here and there. I also feel like playing Pokemon Go for all of these years hasn't really made me like Seviper more. It's never exciting to see it, and I really don't care about it much. Black is actually my favorite color, so you'd think I'd like the multicolored black snake, but I just find it to be very meh. I prefer Zangoose in the big rivalry between the two, but that's also a Pokemon lore thing that I never think about. I also always forget that it's pure poison type. My immediate thought is that it's either pure dark or dark poison, but nope, no dark. Also D tier. Number 11, Servine. I feel like Servine falls into the category of middle evolution starters that do not stand out much. Servine is the pure grass type grass snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 5. It is the evolved form of Snivy at level 17 and evolves into Serperior at level 36. It moves along the ground as if sliding. Its swift movements befuddle its foes, then it attacks with a Vine Whip. The name Servine is a combination of serpent and vine. Its design is based on a tree snake or skink, but there is more to it according to Ken Sugimori. He says the evolution line is meant to be more snake-like as it evolves, so this is in line with the awkward teenager middle stage. He also stated inspirations from the manga of The Rose of Versailles and acanthus leaf motifs from the Renaissance era. Yeah, I had no idea there was this much thought put into it. Statistically, Servine is the best at speed, with HP, attack, and special attack all being tied for the worst, while still being decent, since it is among the grass starting line for this generation. And as I said, it's just one of those middle stages that don't really stand out. This might be a hot take, but Gen 5 is, for me personally, my least favorite generation. I know, blasphemy, right? I have tried 2, maybe 3 times to complete Black and White, and I just cannot get through them. It's just not the generation for me, and I've never taken Snivy before. Therefore, I really have no connection with Servine of all Pokemon. There isn't much more to say about it really, yet another D tier one. Number 10, Silicobra. I feel similarly towards Silicobra that I do to Sandaconda, but I think it has a better design overall. Silicobra is the pure ground-type sand snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 8. It evolves into Sandaconda at level 36. As it digs, it swallows sand and stores it in its neck pouch. The pouch can hold more than 17 pounds of sand. The name Silicobra is a combination of silicone or silt and cobra. Its design is based on, well, a cobra, but also a false cobra with similar colors. The act of shooting sand is similar to a spitting cobra. Statistically, its best stat is defense, with its worst being special attack. Silicobra kinda falls into the C- tier for me. It's not bad, just fine. I kinda like the brown ring around its eyes to make it look like it's crying. It's a sad looking snake that just stands out to me more than Sandaconda does. I just prefer the standard cobra look to the weird, coiled, buried head look. But also, I don't love either of them. I am glad we got some desert snake Pokemon though, since I tend to love the desert themed ones. Number 9, Dunsparce. I have some mixed feelings about Dunsparce. Dunsparce is the pure normal type land snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 2. It was a Solomon way up until Gen 9 when it was given a 2-form evolution of the Dunsparce, either 2 or 3 segments when a Dunsparce is leveled up knowing the move Hyper Drill. When spotted, this Pokemon escapes backward by furiously boring into the ground with its tail. The name Dunsparce is a combination of dun, a dark habitat, and sparse, or scattered. Its design is based on the Tsuchinoko of Japanese folklore, as well as a diggerbee, rattlesnake, flying snake, and a sphinx moth caterpillar. Its best stat is easily HP, with speed being its worst. And for me, my first time playing the silver version when it was released, I did not care about Dunsparce at all. You could only find it in the Dark Cave as a rare encounter, and there didn't seem to be any reason to ever use one of these. They just kind of existed as this forgettable pure normal type just to fill out your Pokedex. And I still mostly feel that way, but I'm of that group of people that grew to appreciate it when the Dunsparce was created in Gen 9. It's still pretty whatever, and I had no idea how big these things were until seeing one in later games. Dunsparce is like 5 feet long. I always pictured them being this little tiny yellow snake thing, but man, they're pretty large. Dunsparce is very much a C tier Pokemon for me. Also, I always thought the name was a play on the word dunce, like we were supposed to not view it as any good. Number 8, Ekans. The original snake, and I've also always been pretty mediocre on Ekans overall. Ekans is the pure poison type snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 1. It evolves into Arbok at level 22. Ekans moves silently and stealthily, eats the eggs of birds such as Pidgey and Spearow whole. The name Ekans is just the word snake spelled backwards. Its design is based on a rattlesnake, an egg-eating snake, a ring-necked snake, and a basilisk. Its best stat is attack, with HP being its worst. The OG of snake Pokemon, and one that probably got its notoriety from the anime, as it was the lone Pokemon that Jessie of Team Rocket used in the beginning. Ekans is about in the same tier as Dunsparce and Silicobra for me. I've never loved it or anything, and I never really care about finding one or fighting one. It's a purple and yellow snake, and that's really about it. I even kind of forget that it has a rattle on its tail. But I mean, this was Gen 1, where a lot of the designs were pretty basic. Gen 1 has your standard issue birds, bats, rats, snakes, etc. And Ekans gets to be the standard issue snake Pokemon. It's fine. Number 7, Dunsparce. An evolved form that looks so close to its base form. Dunsparce is the pure normal type land snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 9. It is the added on evolved form of Dunsparce that evolves when Dunsparce knows the move Hyper Drill and can be in 2 or 3 segment forms. The 3 segment form apparently has a 1% chance of occurring. This Pokemon uses its hard tail to make its nest by boring holes into bedrock deep underground. The nest can reach lengths of over 6 miles. The name Dunsparce is a combination of the Pokemon Dunsparce with dew in front of it to signify double or dud. Its design is based on everything I talked about with Dunsparce, just with an extra segment on it. Its best stat is easily HP, which is pretty high, and its worst stat is speed. And yeah, the main thing with Dunsparce is that there were 7 generations between this evolution. Fans have been thinking there would be an evolution for Dunsparce for so long, and it just never happened. Then it finally did, way into Gen 9, and they just added a segment or 2 to its middle section, and that's it. I and many others think that's pretty hilarious, and I see the humor in it. It's intentionally a letdown and kinda adds to the joke that Dunsparce as a Pokemon was just so forgettable. The whole thing worked on me though, and it not only made me like Dunsparce more, Dunsparce is actually pretty decent to use even. Its HP and attack kinda make it worthwhile, and yeah, I like this thing. But overall for me, it's probably like a high C, maybe low B tier Pokemon. I give it props for making me like an older Pokemon that I never cared about. Number 6, Snivy. As far as the grass starters go, Snivy is honestly probably my second least favorite. Chespin is last for me, but they're all at least fine to great though. Snivy is the pure grass type grass snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 5. It evolves into Servine at 17, which I already talked about, and then finally Serperior at 36. It is very intelligent and calm. Being exposed to lots of sunlight makes its movements swifter. The name Snivy is a combination of snake or snide and ivy. Its design is based on a tree snake or vine snake and was given arms and legs to become more snake-like as it evolves. Snivy's stats are very even across the board, with speed being its best and HP, attack, and special attack tied for last. I feel like Snivy and Servine look very similar to each other, but as is the case with the majority of the starter evolution lines, the baby form or the fully evolved forms are typically the favorites. And I just like Snivy's design more than Servine's. It has that look to it like it knows it's better than you. My only nitpicky problem with it on this list is that it is labeled as a grass snake, and it looks snake-like, but the very definition of a snake is that they are limbless reptiles. So can Snivy really be considered a snake? That's mostly just a fun observation though. I mean, Pokemon are fictional creatures based on stuff in our reality, so giving it arms and legs is a design choice. I actually kinda like that it gradually loses them as it evolves, which is something I didn't necessarily realize at first. Again, I've never used this starting line in a game before, so I don't have any connection to them. I'd put Snivy as a low B tier. Number 5, Hydrapple. This is one of the ones I had to make the final call on. It's described as the Apple Hydra Pokemon, so it was close enough for me. But Hydrapple is the first dual type on this actual snake list as a grass dragon type that was introduced in Gen 9. It is the evolved form of Diplin when it is leveled up knowing the move Dragon Cheer, who in itself is an evolved form of Applin. 7 serpents live inside an apple made of syrup. The serpent in the center is the commander. The name Hydrapple is a combination of the words Hydra and apple. Its design is based on the Hydra, a snake with many heads, as well as the concept of a worm burrowing into an apple. Hydrapple is actually quite powerful statistically, with HP, defense, and special attack all being over 100. Speed is easily its worst. And I just think Hydrapple is a pretty sweet design, and I like the whole idea of different variations of worms or snakes inside apples. Diplin is fine, but then it can evolve into Flapple or Appleton, both I actually really like from Gen 8. But then Hydrapple was created in Gen 9 as part of the Indigo Disc, and it's personally my favorite. Turning the concept of a worm in an apple to a Hydra in an apple is just perfect in my opinion. And funny enough, I've still never played either of the Scarlet and Violet expansions, so this is just off of what I've seen images of. And I'm someone who had a lot of fun with Scarlet and Violet. But yeah, cool concept, I like it. B tier Snake Pokemon. Number 4, Serperior. But yeah, I do ultimately prefer the fully evolved starter of the 3. Serperior is the pure grass-type Regal Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 5. It is the final evolved form of Snivy and Servine at level 36. It can stop its opponent's movements with just a glare. It takes in solar energy and boosts it internally. The name Serperior is a combination of serpent, superior, and maybe warrior or emperor. Its design is based on the same tree or vine snake as Snivy and Servine, as well as a basilisk. Its best stat is speed, with its worst being a 3-way tie of HP, attack, and special attack, par for the evolution line. And yeah, I feel like it's the best design of the 3, and I do like it. It's labeled as the Regal Pokemon, which makes this the only one on the actual snake list to not be described as a snake. But come on, this is clearly a snake Pokemon. I also think it's a pretty bold move to have the final evolved starting Pokemon to not have any limbs either. Serperior really stands out among all of the others for that reason. But it does look quite regal or kingly, and I think it is one of the better snake designs in Pokemon, even with me having never used one before. And for that reason, it stands out at number 4 for me. Number 3, Onix. Whenever I think about Onix, it's never one that I really get excited about. It really sucks to use in game, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a memorable snake Pokemon. Onix is the rock ground type rock snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 1. It was a Solomon until it was given an additional evolution of Steelix in Gen 2. As it grows, the stone portions of its body harden to become similar to a diamond, but colored black. I've never seen a black Onix, but okay. Which is weird because the actual Onix stone is black, yet Onix is always gray. The name Onix is just taking the word onyx and changing the Y to an I. Its design is based on a rock python, or earthworm, as well as the Mongolian deathworm. Onix's best stat is easily its defense, with everything else being pretty subpar, except for speed. And that's definitely a criticism for Onix. It's a 28-foot, almost 500-pound monstrosity of a Pokemon, and it's pretty terrible to use. The very first gym you ever fight in a Pokemon game is Brock with Geodude and Onix, yet little Geodude almost doubles Onix's base attack. Crazy stuff. But as a design, Onix is pretty awesome actually. It's very intimidating looking, and being a snake made of rocks is a great concept. It's the Pokemon Brock is known for, and I think it is deserving to be in the number 3 spot. A tier for Onix. Number 2, Arbok. I mean, let's be honest, I feel like Arbok is the snake Pokemon, even though I don't have it at number 1. Ekans is your standard issue rattlesnake, but Arbok is the one that's going to give you a bad day. Arbok is the pure poison type Cobra Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 1. It is rumored that the ferocious warning markings on its belly differ from area to area. The name Arbok is just Cobra spelled backwards, but with a K instead of a C. Its design is based on the Indian Cobra and a King Cobra. Its best stat is attack, with HP being its worst. And Arbok is another one of the original Gen 1 Pokemon that I grew to really appreciate over time, similar to Kingler. Even though this video is all about snakes, I'm honestly not really a snake guy. I'm not afraid of them, but I wouldn't say I like them. So Arbok was just kinda meh for me. But the more I think about it, the more I like its design. Also, Arbok cards in the TCG tend to be favorites of mine, so that helps. But that design on its hood is actually pretty great. I really love how it was changed to look menacing on the Team Rocket card too. And I like Arbok way more than Weezing when it comes to Jesse and James's Pokemon from the early anime. I've never liked Weezing, but Arbok is a solid high A when it comes to Snake Pokemon. But number 1, and you probably already guessed this because I mentioned it already, Steelix. Out of all of these Snake Pokemon I've talked about, Steelix is the only one that is actually among a top favorite Pokemon of mine. Except for Rayquaza, but I mean of all the actual snakes. Steelix is the Steel Ground-type Iron Snake Pokemon that was introduced in Gen 2. It is the added-on evolved form of Onix when traded over holding a metal coat. Its body has been compressed deep under the ground. As a result, it is even harder than a diamond. The name Steelix is a combination of steel and onyx, and also helix. Its design is based on a snake and an earthworm, and also the Pokemon Onix. Steelix has an extremely high defense stat of 200, but is very slow with speed easily being last. And man, what a cool design. I love when they make additional evolutions for later gens and they end up making perfect sense, and I think Steelix is one of the better examples. The rock segments on Onix turn to steel when it evolves. No complaints from me there. And Steelix is actually worth using, unlike Onix. It's very intimidating looking and I love its extended lower jawline design and blunt spikes that it has too. Steelix is awesome, and for me personally, gets the honor of being the only S-tier snake Pokemon. So how do you feel about this list? Which snakes would you have at the top, and was I wrong with separating the snakes from the serpent-shaped ones? I'm sure you'll let me know, as I tried to be as fair as I could. But again, it's not to be taken too seriously. I think I liked making this video more than the Year of the Dragon one, as there was a bit more of a focus this time instead of covering, you know, an entire Pokemon type. I hope everyone has an excellent Year of the Snake, and hey, happy birthday if you fall into one of the snake years. I'll return to this series next year with the Year of the Horse. Paraspectre will return.